2 years ago, the FBI arrested Robert Hanssen, a 22-year veteran of the Bureau, for selling secrets to Russia. Senior FBI officials called him the worst spy in U.S. history and called the mole hunt that nabbed him a major triumph, a tribute to the skill, judgment, and dedication of its agents. But now it turns out that for years the FBI had targeted the wrong man. The wrong man is Brian Kelly, an undercover officer at the CIA who became the focus of an FBI-led investigation that nearly destroyed his life, not to mention his career.
How many years went by between the time they decided it was you, and only you, and when they finally got Hanssen?
Somewhere around 4 years.
Where he continued to give them secrets.
He knew that he was free and clear because he watched my case.
Hanssen was watching them
Oh, yeah.
go after you?
He had access to virtually everything.
Brian Kelly came into the crosshairs after the FBI and CIA combined forces to find out who was leaking top-secret information to the KGB. What seemed to implicate Kelly the most was the investigation of this man, former State Department official Felix Bloch, who was suspected of spying for Moscow. That case was broken by none other than Brian Kelly, one of the CIA's top spy catchers. But someone in the U.S. government alerted the Russians that Bloch was under investigation before the FBI could catch him in the act, and so the case against Bloch collapsed.
No one could figure out who would have tipped off the Russians. We had it so tightly held at CIA that only about 7 people knew, and they eliminated everybody but me.
Are you saying that you broke the Bloch case and they thought you then turned around and warned him? They're saying you did both of those things?
It's unbelievable, isn't it?
As it turns out, Robert Hanssen was the leak. But at the time, it seemed to the FBI that Brian Kelly knew more than anyone else about a number of cases that had been compromised. And so an elite team of mole hunters secretly searched Kelly's house, placed him under round-the-clock surveillance, tapped his phones and computers, and subjected him to a series of sting operations designed to smoke him out. The first involved a phony investigation of a non-existent defector.
In order to get brought into this investigation, I needed to take a polygraph given me by the FBI.
That was unusual.
I had never heard that happen before. And so if I was a spy, the first thing, that would have tipped me off immediately, but they told me, this is so sensitive, you have to do this.
Kelly agreed to take the test and passed with flying colors. But John Moustakis, Kelly's lawyer, says that made the spy catchers even more suspicious.
Instead of saying, wow, this guy passed the polygraph, maybe he's actually innocent, they used that as evidence of his guilt. They said, he's the Iceman, he's the perfect spy, he can beat the polygraph. You know what? That's preposterous.
The next trap they set for Kelly was something called a false flag operation, where an FBI agent came to his house in Vienna, Virginia, posing as a Russian intelligence officer.
I got a knock on my door, opened it up, and there was a gentleman outside, and he said, I come from your friends, and we're concerned. Meet us tomorrow night at the Vienna Metro. A person will approach you. We have a passport for you, and we'll get you out of the country. And then he left.
Did this guy have a Russian accent?
Yeah, he had a heavy Russian accent.
So what do you think?
I had no idea. I have no...
You're standing there saying, what just happened? You never for a minute said, I'm being suspected of something and they're trying to trap me.
No.
It never crossed your mind?
Not at the time, no.
So the next morning, he reported the encounter to a senior FBI official who, unbeknownst to Kelly, was heading up the team of mole hunters.
You can imagine their chagrin thinking, oh my God, we tried this brilliant ruse and it failed. And immediately, what do? Spin meisters that they are, they say, oh my God, he's perfect. He's a brilliant spy. He knew it was a ruse and he uncovered the ruse. Rather than thinking, well, let's hold on a minute. Let's remember that he also passed the polygraph. Let's put these two things together. They're both exculpatory. They both tend to show that he's innocent.
Moustakis also says the investigation was sloppy. Take the time the FBI searched Kelly's house.
I came home one night, and I'm the only one living here, and in the middle of my foyer was a small screw. Right in the middle of the foyer. Now, I'm thinking to myself, where does the screw come from? It doesn't come from the ceiling, it's just in the middle of the foyer. In retrospect, somebody was in my house, left that behind, and of course it would have been a tip-off if I had been the real spy.
The FBI then ratcheted up the investigation by interviewing Kelly's friends and colleagues. One of them was Kathleen Hunt, who who had been a CIA undercover officer for 20 years.
What kind of questions did they ask you?
Oh, they were asking about Brian's knowledge of diamonds. Did he ever talk about diamonds? Whether he was engaged in internet pornography. Did he go to strip clubs? Did he ever take me to a strip club? It was outrageous.
The FBI had compiled a profile that described not Brian Kelly, but Robert Hansen, who we now know frequented strip joints, visited internet porn sites using his own name, and had asked his Soviet spy masters to pay him in diamonds.
So they knew all of this. When was this?
This was in February of 1999, 2 years almost to the day to Robert Hansen's arrest.
In other words, the FBI had some solid clues, but when they connected the dots, they came up with the wrong picture.
This was a poorly run investigation where the conclusion was foregone from the beginning. What this Bureau doesn't do well is it doesn't account for its own blind spot. It has a huge blind spot insofar as it just can't conceive of the fact that an FBI agent could be crooked.
The man who ran the investigation is the FBI's top spy catcher, David Zadie. He says the focus on Kelly was totally justified.
We haven't pinpointed Brian Kelly for any other reason except he fits into the facts as we know them, the information as we have it.
But not 100%, not even
Oh,
close.
pretty close.
But you have all kinds of things that fit Robert Hansen to a T and don't fit Brian Kelly. It's like trying to get, Cinderella's slipper on the ugly sisters.
No, not really.
Why do you focus so single-mindedly on Brian Kelly?
What you have to understand is when the investigation was moving forward, the type of information that we're receiving clearly focused on the CIA and led us in that direction.
That's partly because the FBI now says the real spy, Robert Hansen, was directing them there. But what about the charge that the FBI was unwilling to look within its own house?
That's total exaggeration and totally a misrepresentation.
Yeah, but
and
you look
actually, it's an
back.
insult to the FBI.
Well, it may be, but you look
a
back and you
personal
got the
insult
wrong
to me.
guy.
No, because the information, the leads, the cases we were losing pointed toward the CIA. And every time we went and looked at the FBI, we were redirected back to the CIA.
But there were clues pointing to the FBI. As early as February 1999, Thomas Kimmel, then a senior FBI agent working on another spy case, came forward to say, we ought to look within the Bureau.
When I brought that to the attention of authorities in the FBI, I was told that the authority was 99.9% sure there was no spy in the FBI.
Kimmel's suspicions were based on what he had learned from Earl Edwin Pitts, an FBI agent who had been arrested in 1996 for selling secrets to the Russians. Kimmel says Pitts could have done a lot more damage.
Earl Pitts had extraordinary access to information about the United States government's operations, specifically about the FBI's operations, and the Soviets didn't appear to be particularly interested.
To Kimmel, that could mean only one thing. The Russians had another mole in the FBI, someone with even better access than Pitts. Earl Pitts thought that himself. In fact, Pitts told his FBI debriefers they might want to look at Robert Hansen. But when Kimmel went to dig deeper, he says he was denied access to the FBI files he needed.
Did you feel that they were stonewalling you?
I knew they were stonewalling me.
Why?
I think they were almost in a lose-lose situation. If there was a spy in the FBI, there was an admission that we were flawed.
The FBI's David Zadie makes no apologies.
So you don't think it was a mistake to know that Earl Pitts had pointed you in that direction and you didn't look there?
Absolutely, it was.
Even Robert Hansen says that if you had done just a simple financial analysis of him, you would say, how did he pay for his expensive home improvement, which cost something like $75,000?
We can't go and do a total financial analysis on every employee of the FBI because we think there may be a mole within the FBI.
But Zadie also knew and dismissed another fact well known around the FBI, that Robert Hansen had been caught hacking into his boss's computer.
You have to put this in perspective. Let's say we knew nothing about a mole, and all we have is the fact that Robert Hansen hacked into a computer, or Robert Hansen paid $75,000 for a home improvement. Do we have a spy in our hands?
The investigators thought not, and in August 1999 turned up the heat on Brian Kelly by bringing him into CIA headquarters for a confrontational interview. It was the first time he realized he was a suspect, let alone the suspect.
They said, "We know who you are. We know what you've been doing. We even know the KGB code name they used for you, which was Carrot, K-A-R-A-T.
And they're throwing this at you with 100% certainty on their part?
Oh, yes.
Then Kelly says he was confronted with this, a hand-sketched map of Nottoway Park in Vienna, Virginia, where the FBI had spotted Russian agents operating. The investigators had obtained the map during the search of Kelly's home and thought it was a diagram of where he made document exchanges with the Russians. One reason they thought that was because he lived only 1/10 of a mile away. But Robert Hansen lived even closer.
Right there is his home he lived at when he started this business.
Right there?
It's right across the street, yep. He would walk out his back door, walk across the street, come down to this bridge. He would put his package down. He would get the package of money later on. He would walk back in the house. You could see probably wouldn't take a couple of minutes from the time he would actually take the package from underneath and walk back in his house with $50,000. It's not a bad evening's work.
When his interrogators whipped out the map, Kelly says it was a scene right out of Perry Mason.
The senior bureau agent jumped up, opened his briefcase up, and slammed a piece of paper in front of him, and he said, "Explain this." And I looked at it, and it took me a moment to realize what it was. It was my jogging map, stamped secret.
The FBI thought the running routes marked on Kelly's jogging map were his drop-off locations.
It's sort of funny now, but
funny.
At the time it was, petrifying.
Did they threaten him?
They threatened him with capital offenses. They said, "You have committed capital crimes." It was not, "You might have done this, you're suspected, there are some clouds, please explain." It was, "You are a spy." And it wasn't just to him. His sisters, his daughters, his friends, his colleagues were all told, to the exclusion of all others, Brian Kelly is an agent of the Russian government.
They stuck to that hard line, even though we have learned that 8 of the roughly 25 investigators believed Kelly was telling the truth, 1/3 of the team. Despite the doubts, Kelly was suspended from the CIA with pay and spent the next year and a half at home waiting and worrying.
You're totally dominated every day with when is the next shoe going to drop? When are you going to be intercepted and thrown up against the hood of the car and charged with espionage? You cannot escape it.
Kelly told us he was at the end of his rope. Meanwhile, the mole hunters decided to expand the investigation to Moscow, where they put the word out that the U.S. would pay top dollar for information they hoped would nail Brian Kelly once and for all. The offer paid off. The FBI got their hands on a Russian intelligence file.
The team gathered to go through the file, which contained a tape recording of the spy talking to his Soviet handler. Someone in the room described the scene to us this way. We listened to it, and it's clearly not Brian Kelly's voice. The hardliners on the team say, of course it's not Kelly's voice. He's too smart to place the call himself. He got a cutout, an intermediary to do it. Then someone from the FBI recognized the voice. It's Bob Hansen's, he said.
Yet the FBI didn't bother to tell Kelly they had found the real mole. 4 more months went by before he realized he was off the hook.
They knew for 4 months?
4 months. Inexcusable.
Robert Hansen's spying came to an end on February 18, 2001, when FBI agents, weapons drawn, swooped down on him and took him into custody. Kelly learned about it 2 days later from his son, who had heard it on a morning newscast.
I woke up very quickly, ran downstairs to the computer, got on, and as soon as I saw the lead story and I saw the name Hansen, who I knew and had worked with, I knew that my nightmare was over.
The very fact that we eventually caught Robert Hansen indicates that our investigation never slowed down, never stopped, and never quit with Brian Kelly.
You don't think this was a failure?
I think that Brian Kelly may have been wronged in this, but eventually we were able to get the mole.
I get the impression, and correct me if I'm wrong, that you didn't learn anything. You wouldn't do anything different. That's the impression you've left. You do it the same way.
Well, how would you not?
The government finally closed the case against Brian Kelly. He's been exonerated and is back at work at the CIA, teaching his fellow spy catchers about the mistakes that were made in the Hansen case. His name has been cleared, but as for his career...
My career it was lost. It was lost. 4 years, basically, of my career was, at this stage, it's lost.
Why aren't you suing? You could.
Yeah, I could. But the message would be lost at this stage. The message is to reform, is to fix the system.
Are you fearful that this could happen again with an FBI investigation? That's what it sounds like.
Unless there's changes made. There has to be changes.
But have there been changes made?
I'm not aware of it. That's why I'm here. I don't want this to happen to anybody else.
The FBI says that no one who worked on this case has been fired, demoted, or even disciplined. Several have been promoted.